Well, good morning, everyone. We're just letting people filter in for a few minutes, so it's just going to be a little bit of filler here at the top. But while we're letting everyone into the webinar, I will just remind people that you can go to hyperspacechallenge.com and learn all about our ongoing webinar series. And you can interact with us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and directly, again, through the website, hyperspacechallenge.com. And we will get going with the full panel as soon as we kind of let a few people pepper in. We like to give people a few minutes to just get settled. There's always the people who join 2 minutes early and are ready right at the top of the webinar. And then if you're like me, you're joining 3 minutes late and you have no idea who's talking. So I like to make sure that we have room for people to be the version of me. And we'll get going pretty soon. And it looks like we have a good amount of attendees popping in. So I'll go ahead and get us started. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll have people as people come, we can kind of welcome them as well. But my name is Meredith Schweitzer. I am one part of the communications team for the Hyperspace Challenge, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar with some pretty heavy hitters on experience around Space Symposium. So I think we're going to get into some good conversation about the do's and don'ts and some tips that maybe you haven't heard before to make the most of this huge event. So if you haven't joined us before, the Hyperspace Challenge is a business incubator. We're based in New Mexico and are really designed to enable greater conversations between government and commercial entities and to facilitate innovation and research a little bit more quickly to address government needs and commercialization efforts. And a lot of the work that we do actually aligns pretty nicely with what Kelly is working on now. So I told her we need to have some follow-up conversations too. But I am going to get everyone into this conversation about Space Symposium and remind you that you can put any questions into the chat or into the Q&A. We will catch them better if you put them in the Q&A. So if you have questions, throw them in Q&A and I will keep an eye on those as we go and either pepper them in as we're going or save some time at the end. So we really encourage you to take advantage of this panel and ask questions when you have them. They are really have a lot of insight here. So take advantage of being in the moment. And with that, I think what I'd like to do is let everyone just do a really brief introduction. Tell us your name, the company or affiliation that you have now. And I'd love for you to start with maybe a guess of how many times you've attended Space Symposium. So we'll start with Brigadier General Feltman. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Meredith, and good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. My name is Damon Feltman, and my background is, as you kind of guessed from Meredith's intro, I retired from the Air Force and Air Force Reserve last summer after about 32 years. I was Brigadier General working on the Space Force staff when I retired, and I've been a career-long space operations person inside the DoD during just about that entire period of time. Since retiring, I have my fingers in several different activities. One is I'm the board chair for an organization called the Association of Commercial Space Professionals. It's a nonprofit that is headquartered in New Mexico. And its focus is educating and training and advocacy for small companies, actually the entire industry, but our big effort is towards small companies that are trying to understand the regulatory environment of space. Because so much of what companies do, kind of as they try to transition out of the small startup phase into the larger company phase, they end up running into strong headwinds if they don't know how to get through the regulatory environment. So that's activity number one. The second activity is there's an organization called the Space Force Association. It is not uncommon for the services to have a nonprofit, an independent nonprofit that supports their work, just like the Air Force has one, the Navy, the Marines, the Army, Space Force has one, and I'm helping that organization establish a chapter in Huntsville, Alabama, where I live. And then lastly, I also am a federal civilian right now, and I work at the Space Development Agency, headquartered in DC, but I live in Huntsville and work from there. So I'm here on my own personal accord. I'm not here representing SDA. I'm kind of touching all three bases of my background at once. And I've probably been to Space Symposium probably a dozen times, even back in the early '90s before it really blew up into something big. So it's an interesting activity and fun to go to.
Great, thank you so much, Damon. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Fleming. I am the Director of Strategy and Innovation for Space Forge here in the US. We are a company that focuses on advanced manufacturing for semiconductor materials and other activities in space. We also will be offering microgravity research opportunities and a variety of other services. So stay tuned for that. Hazarding a guess at the number of symposiums, I want to say somewhere around maybe 7 or 8 very successful space symposiums, though. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
And Kelly, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Kelly Kiedis-Ogborn. I'm Vice President of Space Commerce and Entrepreneurship at Space Foundation, the organization that puts on Space Symposium. Although I am not on the symposium organization side of the house, I run a department called Space Commerce Institute, which really focuses on business growth into the new space economy. So as Meredith mentioned, a lot of synergies amongst our two groups. What I focus on a lot is qualifying and quantifying opportunities within space. So really looking at market growth, business opportunity, technology verticals. And then we do things like run space business focused incubators and accelerators. We do consulting to help create better strategic insertion plans and sort of anything within there. For Symposium itself, this is going to be my 7th, 2 going as an attendee, and then my 5th actually running things. So speaking on panels, running programs. So it's very fun.
Well, thank you all for participating in this. I think that we'll get into some good things here. And in fact, I think it's probably best to start with you, Kelly, to although Damon could kind of point to what Symposium was like before it was renamed. I'd love to hear from you, Kelly, kind of the overview that you like to give people. If I highly doubt that anyone that's attending this panel, the session today, doesn't know about Space Symposium, but if you want to give kind of the traditional, what is it, who goes, why should you go kind of message, let's start there.
Great. No, I appreciate the opportunity to plug it because it is still, thought of as the premier convergence of the global space ecosystem. So this year, it'll be our 39th symposium. Space Foundation was 40 years old last year. Our 39th symposium is this year. Next year will be the 40th. So much more programming to come from that. And as was mentioned before, it did start as a national space symposium. So it grew out of the need to be able to highlight U.S. national priorities within the global space domain. But it's evolved into so much more than that. So just some stats from last year, we had about 12,000 participants. From the year before, we had over 46 countries represented and 17 different heads of agencies. The other piece too is that it really is the #1 place where you have this convergence of global space agencies, US department heads, all of the CEOs of all the major commercial companies. There's a growing academic presence. There's a growing nonprofit presence. There's a growing, startup presence. And so it really is the place where business gets done. We hear often from companies that they get more business done in those 4 days than throughout the whole year. And I always joke, it's not so much of a joke, but it really is a marathon. And if my voice is not gone by Thursday night, then I wasn't really doing it right. So a lot of opportunity. The one thing I will say in terms of its growth that a lot of people don't realize is, as I mentioned, a lot of people still sometimes think about it as national security, but they don't realize that more than 60% of our programming is actually focused on the commercial sector. And so it's looking at things like requirements, regulatory support, how to advance trade, and then really a lot of education around how companies can do business with the government. So even a lot of the government sessions are focused more on acquisition strategies and processes and really fostering a lot of B2G, which is great because that's what a lot of these commercial companies are going to get the most value out of. For example, this year, one of the things that's happening is Dr. John Plum, who's the Assistant Secretary Director of space policy for OSD is going to be unveiling his commercial space strategy. And so that's going to be the first time that people are going to be able to hear it and engage with it. And so that's really exciting. And then what we've also tried to do is really increasingly highlight, promote, and engage opportunities for new companies or high growth companies. And so you'll start to see new things incorporated. Like we have an investor track now that's really focused on purely the funding side of space. We also have a lunch called the Game Changers Lunch, which really focuses on a lot of these latest and greatest technologies and capabilities for the warfighter, but also for future space exploration. And so we're constantly looking for new programming and new avenues to facilitate and foster the conversations that are constantly evolving within this space ecosystem.
That was such a great overview. I mean, I think the point of it being a marathon is one that people who have gone maybe once or twice are sort of like, oh God, this is a lot, right? But the other thing I think is really interesting in just that brief overview is something that we're seeing across the industry broadly is this a de-siloing and really finding
Yes.
ways to make sure that government and commercial can interact with each other and not just speak, independently. So thank you for that overview, Kelly. Damon, I'd love to hear from you if you wouldn't mind talking about if you can maybe reflect on what companies on what companies that are in your role, probably your Air Force role most specifically, and maybe more recently the Space Force role. What kinds of successful things have you seen from companies reaching out to officials? What are some good pieces of advice for people who want to make connections and be successful in building kind of meetings and relationships to work on that de-siloing effort?
Sure. Thank you. So I think what I would offer is the more successful companies are well prepared from the sense of understanding that particularly if a person is if they're trying to set up a meeting with a senior government official, and I'll bound that comment to just the DoD. It may probably extend out to NASA and other places, but that senior official will probably have a dance card. We use it kind of tongue-in-cheek dance card of they'll meet with several dozen companies over the course of the symposium. And so it is a marathon, as was pointed to. I think last year when I went, I did 20 vendor visits in 2 days, and it's exhausting. So when you walk in, it'll be a short meeting, whether you're a big company or a small company. Usually it's going to be about a 30-minute tag up. You might get 45 minutes, but it's being prepared for that. I don't want to call it Shark Tank, but you do need to have your story put together as what was it that caused your company to be interested in talking to a particular person? Do you have an appreciation? You don't have to be, an expert, but do you have an appreciation for what that particular organization is doing so that you can have a meaningful conversation? Because I have gone into plenty of meetings where, a particular company wanted to talk about a piece of technology that was nowhere in my suite of things that I was working on, and that's okay. I'm always super happy to talk to vendors because I know what the symposium is. It is as was pointed out, it is a giant mixing bowl. 12,000 people will show up, and it is a great networking opportunity. And it is a big commitment from companies to invest money to send people out there. It's a big commitment of time to go out there. And so I'm always glad to talk to vendors. I would just say that understanding the context of that particular leader and what it is you think that your particular company offers is extremely valuable, so that you can get right to the point of managing the time effectively. And then probably the last thing I would say is appreciating the fact that in the government there is no such thing as I meet you one day and we cut a contract, the next day. It is no kidding a building of relationships that will take months to years before landing a big contract. So there are companies who don't understand that nuance very well. The government is very different than the commercial enterprise. So I'll just stop with that and hand it back to you.
I think one of the things that you're saying, Damon, is really critical that we've been reinforcing in some of these webinars over the last couple of months is that number one, do your research, right, on which agency is focused on which efforts. And we were in a conversation with someone earlier this month about understanding those relationships. And I think two things are kind of really important that play into this conversation. One is it's not always the highest ranking person that you want to connect with. That being open to talking to really anyone in the agency to just get to know people and to really understand the nuance of who's doing what and who's researching what, and to be willing to do that research ahead of time of what is JPL doing, what is, Web Center doing, like who's researching what, who's looking for in-space manufacturing versus, imagery, to understand like which parts of which agencies are interested in certain technologies is going to be a big advantage going into those conversations.
Absolutely. And if I can circle back to your comments and just add a little bit more to it, the organizations like the Space Force, Space Systems Command, Space Development Agency, Space RCO, we do award large dollar contracts, but the real power, the real transactional power is occurring at the program manager level. That lieutenant colonel or colonel and their small team that are managing the activity kind of on a day-to-day basis. I'll offer a vignette. Maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, Lieutenant General Mike Gutlein, who's now General Gutlein, who's now the Vice Chief of Space Operations. I was on a telecon with him talking about the symposium. We were at about this time, and he was like, this event is so valuable to him and his team because he can have all of his program managers go and meet with just about everybody they need to meet with in a very short period of time. And it's a great foundation setting event for the business that goes on or that was going on at Space Systems Command. So I'll just offer that.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Michelle, I want to turn it over to you. I think one of the reasons we wanted to bring you on from the Space Forge side is we've been working directly with you over the last couple of months and have seen just really how you and the team have really approached strategically understanding what the potential opportunities are and how to resource your team across the opportunities. I think you all have done an excellent job of understanding kind of what are the goals that we're going into Space Symposium with, how are we going to schedule ourselves out, what kinds of things, what kinds of meetings do we want to be arranging, that sort of thing. I'd love to hear if you'd be willing to share with us kind of the approach that you all have taken and some advice that you have for companies that maybe haven't thought that strategically and are registered and know they're going, and that's kind of where their planning has stopped.
Yeah, sure. Happy to help. So a couple of thoughts, and these are in no particular order of importance. They're all important, so I'll start with that. Going back to what Damon said, it is very, very important that you know your goals. I strongly encourage, especially commercial, to start minimum 3 to 4 months before symposium. Earlier is better. I would say 3 to 4 months should be the latest that you wait. Get all of your organizational items in place. Have you registered? Do you have your travel? Do you have your lodging? All of those things for startups, especially budgetarily speaking, it isn't going to get cheaper if you wait. So make sure that you take care of all of those easy things right off the bat. Have a spreadsheet, if it's a Google sheet that you share or a gatekeeper for your meetings and appointments. Really, really critical to get that organizational structure set in advance so that you're not having conflicting meetings or oops, I missed this, or you're running around at the last minute, missing things. Quick story. I was at a conference and it was in the hotel, and I was on the 8th floor of the hotel going from my room back down to the area, and got stuck in an elevator, not stuck, but was in the elevator with one other individual who was a military person who was actually on General Gutlein's staff. And so I introduced myself. I'm not shy that way. And he said, "So what's your pitch?" Because he wanted to share it. And I literally gave an elevator speech in an elevator, which I would not have been able to do if I hadn't practiced. So Once you know what those goals are, you reach out, you start setting those meetings, the most important ones, and then you practice. What do you want to say? What are the points that you want to make? It's very easy to get distracted. There's a lot going on. I'm in a hotel restaurant right now, and there's an enormous amount of activity. So you want to make sure that you're staying focused on your goals and that you're meeting those goals and that your organizational structure does that. A couple of other important points, if I may. Weekly meetings, really important because people are going to do outreach and things are going to change. So you want to make sure that you're connecting with your internal team, but that you're also staying in touch with new possible meetings and new possible activities that are going on at Space Symposium. Registration, we talked about when you're in your meetings, and this is just a personal thing for me, but I've been to those conferences where I'm talking to someone and that person is already on to the next meeting. They're looking behind me to see who's walking by, or they're looking at their watch, or they're down on their phone. My suggestion is, as was pointed out, this is a significant investment for your small business, for your large business, for any business. Take advantage of the time that you're there. Make sure that you are connecting and looking directly at and speaking with and absorbing and sharing 100% during that time, because we're all going to be inundated with a lot of information. 2 more points: business cards, business cards, business cards, either paper or virtual. There are some great cost-effective virtual ways that you can carry your information and share it. But also everybody likes a business card from time to time. And then my last point is, and Meredith will appreciate this, market yourself every opportunity that you get in the advancing months towards Space Symposium. So for example, Space Forge will be at booth 633 under the Goon Hilly name. Please stop by and visit if you're going to be there. We'd love to see you and share information and hear about what you're doing. But little things like your away message on your email. Sorry, I can't respond to your email right now. Hey, if you're going to Symposium, please stop by and visit us at booth 123 or wherever you're going to be. So there's lots more, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Michelle, that's a great point on the away message. And in fact, we've advised people that we work with sometimes, if they're going and they're new to going, that you add it to your signature line the month in advance. Hey, I'm going to Space Symposium. Do you want to meet there? Schedule 20-minute with my Calendly, to get those kind of organic opportunities of people maybe you are just starting to talk with, or they know they're going. It's just another way to remind people that you'll be there and to provide kind of a primer for a networking opportunity.
Yeah, I have one last thing I'd like to add too. I'm a note taker, so don't forget, always have maybe a little something to write with or a way to record either on your phone if you're taking notes there, but don't forget to take something that you can record those meetings, the high level goals and activities and people that you meet there.
And we'll get to, as we keep going, so stay to the end, some of the ways that these folks suggest follow-ups, because I think out of this conference in particular, there are other conferences where things it's a one-time hit, right? But Space Symposium, to Kelly's earlier point, is an opportunity to really drive home like your full year's worth of opportunities. So we'll talk about follow-up shortly, but I'd love to hear, Kelly, if you wouldn't mind talking about it on the same kind of thread. Suggestions you might have for how companies should approach opportunities for meetings and gatherings that are outside of exhibit hall or the traditional sessions. Like, what are some places or spaces that are opportunities that people might not know about or should be planning to attend or work within in advance?
Yeah, so the one thing I do want to mention for folks that haven't been there, and I don't want to scare people off from Symposium, because while it is a lot of activity, it's a lot of activity not within a very broad area. So, and the reason I say this is I just came from South by Southwest. It was my first time, and it was wild. I could not capture everything that was happening because it was sort of all over downtown Austin. There is a beauty in the Broadmoor of having it at the Broadmoor, because things are contained in areas where they're not that hard to get to. The campus isn't that spread out. and also the way and where people walk from each. You run into everyone, whether you're walking from the expo hall to the main Broadmoor area where people hang out, or some of the areas where the actual sessions are happening. So I don't want people to feel like it's overwhelming where they're not going to know where they should be going. It's overwhelming in the sense of where to focus on your opportunities. So what both of the other panelists mentioned about having goals and being very laser focused on what are your top 3 objectives for symposium really is the main piece. The other thing you also need to remember is who's attending symposium. So beyond the broad spectrum of the types of attendees, whether it's, government, civil, commercial, international, these are where all the decision makers are. So a lot of different conferences have different flavors of people. So like SmallSat, for example, is a lot more of the technical folks. It's more of the program managers. At Symposium, it's all the decision makers. It's the BD folks, it's the decision makers. And sometimes, depending on the size of their delegation, they will also have technical folks with them. But that's why I stress that BD business component, because that's what people come there for. It's partially information sharing, but it's really to drive B2B, B2G. So that's good. So some other strategies I will say is, I think like anything, like most of the business is done not in the sessions. So the sessions are good because there is a lot of really interesting information coming out. And quite frankly, it's where a lot of organizations and entities announce things. So as I mentioned, OSD is going to announce their commercial space strategy. NASA generally does a big unveiling. So from information hearing here first, there's definitely that, but most of the business is done outside of the strategy sessions the sessions. But to Damon's point, most people already have their schedules set in advance. And so don't approach it like if you want to talk to a certain person that you think you're going to catch them after their session that they're speaking on, because they will be whisked away to another. So start getting on their schedules now. And if you're not able to get on their schedule, see potentially who else from their delegation or staff would be there to meet with them. Another thing that people don't utilize in the capacity is really the exhibit hall. So we have a ton of exhibitors, and over the course of the years, there's now 2 exhibit halls because it's just gotten in so much more demand. And honestly, you could spend 2 full days in the exhibit hall and get a lot of business done. But some companies come to Symposium and don't buy Symposium tickets. Smaller companies in particular. However, what they don't realize is that every exhibitor gets exhibitor guest passes. So if you're trying to meet with a company and you're not buying a full Symposium pass, you could talk to that company in advance, see if they could give you one of their guest passes to then go and meet them at their booth. A lot of people don't actually know that. And of course, the exhibitors are going to be judicious about who they give that to and rotate it. But that is another way for you to potentially meet them on their territory and on their turf if you're not able to get a meeting with them or able to meet them by happenstance through the different avenues. There's also for folks that are going that already have passes, I cannot understate the amount of business that gets done around the Broadmoor bar. I mean, it is like the collision point, and it's kind of the main area where both of the escalators go up, and not just in the bar, but like that whole lobby area is where people sit down, and some people will just like stage themselves there and wait for people to walk by because everybody will walk by. So just use advantage of those spaces as well. Even if you jump on with someone and offer to walk with them to their next meeting to talk, that is a good strategy too, because people come to Symposium expecting to do business. So unless they're really engaged in something else, you're really not going to be bothering them, because that's the whole point of being there. It's just utilizing every advantage to an opportunity.
I think you're making several really important points that I want to reinforce. One is that while 10,000 to 14,000 feels completely overwhelming, if you're doing it right, by the end, you feel like it's 500 people, because you're seeing each other repeatedly. So I think that is like a really important point of, being open to just sort of seeing each other repeatedly and knowing, knowing that that's going to happen. I think that's a great point. The other thing that I love that you're saying, Kelly, is this is sort of like an extrovert's game, right? Like it's the more you're willing to talk to people, the more connections you're going to make. So you can do all of this planning in advance, But if you're not taking advantage of those gap times just by being a human and talking to each other, then you're really going to miss some like key opportunities, right?
Right. Well, and it's just understanding that everyone is there for that same reason.
Right.
And so unless they're engaged in something else, they are going to want to talk to you. Like that is the point. That is the point of going. And so not being shy to approach someone and have that conversation unless you're interrupting them, right? Or so just
with respect though.
With respect.
Have some social grace, right?
Yes.
Yeah. One thing to that point, and I'd love to hear from all three of you. You know, we had an earlier panel with a VC group, and she had this really wonderful thing about in pitch decks, like if you had an exit, lead with that you had an exit. It was a super concrete, tiny piece of advice that was directly applicable to what she's looking to hear. I'd be really curious in your experience. And in particular, you, Damon, you know, if companies know that they have 3 minutes in passing, what would you say are like the top 3 things? Like make sure that you mention this, this, and this if you're talking to a new person who you think could be a potential, you know, collaborator, partner, etc.
Yeah. So I'll wear my space development agency hat for a moment, and I'm not speaking for them, but just that experience background. Knowing where your technology is on the spectrum of development. So are you, TRL 1 through 3, or are you TRL 4, 5, and 6, or are you no kidding at a manufacturing level? Because what I'm thinking of, so the government, at least at the headquarters Space Force level, at the headquarters Space Systems Command level, we're not out to buy dozens or thousands of widgets. We're out buying whole spacecraft. But what I am interested in is if you are at a high TRL, I can then go, I'll make sure that when I meet with company X later, who is going to be lining up subs, I can say, well, I met this great company, go check them out and see if they're, going to be an acceptable partner. So understanding where you are on your technology manufacturing spectrum is probably one of the bigger points for me. And I can't speak for other agencies inside of the DoD, but that one has always been kind of an interesting point for me. If I could, for just a second, I do want to go back to what Kelly was saying about just understanding the environment. I'll also add that, so the Broadmoor is on the west side of Colorado Springs. You kind of have to transit through downtown to get over there. And you'll have lots of folks in the downtown area after hours doing either, kind of open parties, or even though they'll be doing their own private events. But if you're out at the various restaurants and bars and whatever, you will see lots of people out there. So you may have some additional opportune times just going out into the community if you're going to go from the Broadmoor campus after hours. So you'll see plenty of folks out and about that you can have conversations with.
Thank you. And Michelle, from your end, what kinds of 1, 2, 3 punch pieces do you think have been successful from the commercial side talking to people when you have gone? Do you have some advice on that?
Yeah. So first off, I would say, especially for technical companies that have a complex product that may be a little bit more difficult to explain, keep in mind this is sort of like speed meeting. Get the high level points out. Introduce yourself. You want to make that connection. That's number 1. Number 2, be interested in what they're saying, listen carefully, and make notes so that you can follow up and do research. But number 3, and again, I will stress this because it cannot be stressed enough, make sure you know your goal, your product, your project, your pitch, what you want to say, and then put it down to a couple of sentences. Nobody wants to stand there and listen to 3 hours of your dissertation on your product. So those are the 3 main things that you want to make sure that you're doing in each of your meetings. That was what you?
Oh, that was perfect.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah. Kelly, same kind of question from your experience of just witnessing and participating. What kinds of advice do you have in this vein?
Yeah, I would say short and pithy and to the point is the way to go. Because going back to the idea of BD, it's putting it in the context of how they can utilize it and engage, not what the latest and greatest widget is. You never want to leave the guesswork up to someone about how to use what you're trying to pitch them. So I think that that is the most critical thing. And really, to your point, Meredith, you made it in the beginning that especially with government or others, you're not going to walk away with a contract immediately, but at least just setting the stage and making enough of an impression for the next meeting. So you're really having those conversations for the next meeting. And one thing I will say about just the amount of networking at Symposium is people are still, what I've experienced, sort of playing Symposium catch up for about a month after. And so don't be discouraged too if the next meeting isn't set up until like early May. It's just combing through all the opportunities and racking and stacking them. I always follow up immediately, like the Friday or the Monday after, just to stay top of mind. But the process of kind of decompressing is about a month or two after.
I think physically decompressing too. It's not like any of the other industry conferences where the next Monday you're like, oh, I'm ready to go. I always feel like
you're tired.
You need a couple days to physically recover. I would love to actually, I think that's like the perfect transition to talk about follow-up. Maybe Michelle, let's start with you. I loved your advice of make sure you're kind of keeping notes, which I think a good BD person, you're doing that anyway, but just thinking through kind of your systems of any like advice you might have for people on what your follow-ups tend to look like, how you kind of structure that or how you debrief, that kind of thing.
Sure. So in business development in general, be it with another corporation or the government or whomever, I'm thinking strategically I want to move to the next step. What is my next step? This is where you've laid the foundation with your goals, and then you want to move to the next step. So in 100% agreement with Kelly, I strongly encourage you to send a text or an email. 48 to 72 hours, doesn't have to be a long recapture, just, hey, it was great to meet you. Looking forward to our next event or next conversation, etc. And then maybe one line with a couple of suggestions 3 to 4 weeks later. Let's connect the week of such and such. And so then that gives them that period of time to connect, to decompress physically and mentally, and then also they have something in writing. You've said thank you for their time, but you've also laid the foundation to move to that next step. One point I did want to make, Kelly mentioned, and also Damon has mentioned, a lot of business gets done at Space Symposium. If you are looking to close contracts and close business at Space Symposium, this goes even more to the point where you want to start as early as possible to build those relationships. If they're in person, great, but if they're via Zoom meetings or other avenues, and then maybe you will be in a position to close that contract at Space Symposium. And then the follow-up from that, of course, is, hey, great, let's work on our announcement, do our PR, and so on and so forth. So that's how I would approach it.
Love it. I think that's so helpful. I like to think of these follow-ups as like copywriting. You want them to read sentence 1 so that they get to sentence 2, so they get to sentence 3, and then they close, So I think that structure that you just kind of described is really helpful for people. Or I hope it is.
Yeah. And one last thing too, it's worth the time to put something personal in there. It doesn't have to be a lot. You can do the form email, but if you had a personal discussion or you had a connection with that individual, don't just send them a form email. Make it so that you maintain that connection and that you have something to build that relationship on beyond Space Symposium as well.
Right. And Damon, I'd love your thoughts. I mean, I know there are kind of formal structures for debriefing for teams. But if you have any thoughts on follow-ups, advice you could give to companies that they might not be thinking of, aside from sort of how Michelle laid out a structure.
So I'll say that the short follow-up is always helpful, because for me, like when my Outlook inbox right now, I have a folder for Symposium, and underneath is like vendor visits. That's a category that I have in there, and everybody I'm meeting with has their own folder. And so afterwards, I take that and I transition it over into kind of like my permanent records. But I think everybody does that, and we all talk about who we met with, and what we liked and what we didn't like. So the short little follow up is always welcome. And when I say short, it's readable on a single pain of your iPhone. It's not the dissertation kind of thing, just because you're meeting with so many folks during the week. And then for my experience, the things that I tend to try to do is I have handed off contacts to other subordinate organizations inside of my team. When I was at Space Force, I would go to the requirements team, or I would go to the international partners team and say, hey, I met this company at Symposium, and they do X. Please keep them in mind when we have our next industry day, or when we get ready to do our next SBIR announcement. Please make sure that you put them on the announcement list. So, some of those types of things, and that because for me, like I said, I'm not necessarily looking to immediately close a deal, but I will try my best if the company's technology, if I can envision it mapping into something that I'm working on, I will go back and look for, do we have a broad area announcement that this company can map to? And I'll make sure to try to follow up with that. Or is there an SBIR technology area that we have interest in, or is there an industry day coming up? So I'm always trying to look for an opportunity to not pick a winner, so to speak, but certainly, again, make it worth the effort that everybody put into this. That, hey, going to Symposium wasn't just about seeing a beautiful resort and being up against the Colorado mountains. There is something worth going to Colorado for. I think maybe the last thing I would offer is don't be surprised. I get a lot of like LinkedIn requests afterwards. And I am a big LinkedIn user, but as a government person, I'm pretty judicious about who I bring in, because I try to keep a arm's length from companies that I might be doing business with, just from an ethics standpoint. And then also there are tons and tons and tons of foreign companies or foreign nationals at Symposium. And from a government perspective, I also have to be mindful of that. So don't be offended if you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn and they don't respond right away, or if they don't respond at all. But still, it is a thing that I do, is if there's a place where I can, I will connect with somebody on LinkedIn, just so we can see what each other's up to, and mutual interests. How about that?
I think don't be offended is a general rule of thumb coming off of Symposium anyway, right? And now I feel so special that I'm connected to you on LinkedIn, David. Kelly, I'd love to hear, if you wouldn't mind talking about, are there opportunities or ways that Space Symposium itself makes it easier or more efficient for people to follow up with people they may have met, or just ways that Space Symposium navigates that at all?
So we have an app tracker, but it's more agenda-based, not necessarily communication amongst participants. So nothing formal. Although we do, in the age of social media, we kind of encourage people to use certain hashtags if they were there and if they want to try to locate someone or locate them after. But it's mainly in the for the participants to take on. One thing I do want to add, though, about strategies for engagement, and I think this is just for good business practice, and agree with both what they said, but I also think that follow up with people even if you don't see an immediate value. And what I mean by that is that I've been doing R&D and innovation for 17 years. I ran a consulting company, and I think that if you have an interesting conversation with anyone, build your network because you want to be around thoughtful, engaging people, not because you just think they can do something for you, because there's nothing worse than meeting someone and they completely disregard you, and then they realize in a year that they could benefit from something, and then they re-engage because it is so transparent. And it makes you feel bad, right? Because was I not valuable enough to them now to engage with? And so follow up, and obviously we're all, you're there to do business development, and so you can prioritize. But if you have a great conversation with someone and they're just a cool person to know in the industry, follow up with them too, because the industry also is very fluid and people move all the time. And I can't tell you how many times I run into people and they're with a new affiliation and a new organization. And it really is true, is that people never forget how you make them feel. And it totally transfers into BD. And so just build your network to build your network, rack and stack who you actually need to prioritize from a business aspect, but definitely get back to everyone that you said you would get back to.
And to that point, I think it's a good thing to think about. It's going into symposium, and really any conference, I guess, is true, is that it's not a take. You're not going there to take. You know, if you have a thing, if you have a connection to give, or you have something that's a give in that interesting conversation, generosity goes a long way. Especially to your point, Kelly, while the space industry may feel big, you know, as soon as you start making those connections, it's pretty darn small when you say so, you know, be nice and give. You know, if you give value, that goes a long way, even if you're not seeing a commercial benefit for your company personally at the moment, you know.
Well, and I'll also say that when I ran my consulting company, because I did tech commercialization, I got deals from very unexpected places. So I would meet someone and they would be in my network, and then they would be talking to someone and like, oh, this company can actually help you. And then they're referred. So you just never know where deals or opportunities or who's in a room with who. So it's just worth building that in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, I love that. And it also reinforces Michelle's point of practice what you keep your narrative consistent, because you know that narrative could be repeated by other people to people who have heard a different narrative at a different time. So it's good to get that sort of elevator pitch down, and be consistent about what you're communicating. We work with a lot of companies where we drill down on what that why is and get people to really talk about their why and their how in a very consistent way, so that you can reinforce that. Because I always say repeating is not redundancy, it's reinforcing, you know. So I think that's it, as you're networking, something that's helpful to keep in mind as well. I know we're about 10 minutes out, and if there are any questions, I haven't seen any questions come in through the Q&A, but if you all have questions for these folks, we'd love to get the audience involved. I've got chat and the Q&A open, so feel free to pepper things in here. I want to go back to Kelly. Kelly, do you have, well, two things. One is, you mentioned at the top, you know, sometimes you can't afford to go, or you can't go because you're finishing a submission and there's just not, you know, there's not the time and space, but there are ways for people to engage in symposium rather than boots on the ground. Do you want to talk a little bit about that while we wait to see if there are any questions?
Of course. Yeah. So we realize, you know, that especially as we're trying to capture a lot of these new audiences and new companies that are going to be really relevant to Space's growth. Symposium is a commitment, financial and time-wise. So we do actually have a virtual component. It's called Symposium 365. So if you go to the Space Foundation website, which is spacefoundation.org, you can see a link to it. And there's really two ways to engage. So there is a live stream that happens during Symposium. Every Symposium participant that buys a full ticket also gets access to this live stream for free. But if people are not able to attend, they can purchase it. For this webinar, we actually did create a 50% off coupon code for all of you. So I will make sure to drop that into the chat, but that's a really good opportunity to engage in real time and get the information, you know, as it's fresh to the eyes and ears of everyone attending. The other thing too is that on that Symposium 365 platform, a good portion of the programming from Symposium is then made available about 90 days after. So some of the sessions that are really critical, primarily in our plenary sessions, you know, some of the big announcements from organizations, those videos will be available for free, but there's about a 60 to 90 day delay because we have to refine it, do our follow-up, you know, get it on the site, all of that sort of thing. So really two options. There's the free content, and then there's the live stream, which puts you in the action during that time. And I'm happy to drop the chat into the chat, the link for the discount code.
Oh, lovely. Great. We do have one question, and it points to some of the things that we've been talking about. So the question is there a central location to sign up for time with people? If not, how do you do it? And maybe this is more of a logistics question that Damon, I think you can kind of point to. And Michelle, on the commercial side, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but go ahead. And I think I know some of the answers, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I can speak for the DoD. The Air Force and Space Force is that as kind of a hierarchical organization, the more senior you get, the more handlers you get. And so really it's somebody will be appointed as the handler. So I worked for Lieutenant General Garant and Lieutenant General LaCory before I retired, and now it's Lieutenant General Bratton. So the chief of requirements for Space Force. And so one of their team members will be the person responsible for lining up their agenda while they're out there. And so there's a little bit of cold calling that might go on. I mean, this is where it helps to kind of pay attention to the organization of the Space Force and kind of do a little bit of research, a little bit of internet-based research on who's who in the zoo and figuring out who those people are. And so, yeah, you could discover General Bratton's email address and it'll get to him. But what will really happen is it's going to get intercepted by somebody who will then, get it diverted and they'll try to figure out where you are, where your organization sits in the hierarchy of things that we need. And, you might get a questionnaire about, hey, what's your company? What's your pitch? Why you wanted to meet? And so on. And the dance card gets built. So so there's that level of high, kind of high filtering, high formality. And then as you get down to like the program manager level, it's a lot more, I'd say informal, just an email that comes in. Hey, somebody at some company told me about you inside of Space Systems Command and that you work in this program. Can we meet? And it can be really low key at that level. So this goes back to what we've been saying a lot during this conversation is know who you want to speak to and why, have that kind of planned out, have your story kind of lined out, and that will help you manage your time, your limited time and resources more effectively by targeting the right person and meeting with the right person at symposium.
And do it early.
Yeah.
And get on that list early.
Yeah, there are a handful of folks that I knew would want to meet. So we started talking about 2 months ago.
Yeah, exactly. Michelle, you want to respond to that as well?
Yeah, from the commercial side, and I apologize in advance for any background noise. The cold calling is just part of what we do. So my suggestion would be go to the exhibitor list on the Space Symposium website, start looking at those companies' websites, send them an email, info at or hello at, or call the company and just say, hey, I'm going to be at Space Symposium. Is there someone I can talk to about setting up a meeting? And 9 times out of 10, they're going to love to meet with you.
Great. I think so. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and I'd love to, I've been kind of pushing certain ways and haven't given you all an opportunity to share if there's something that maybe we haven't touched on that you were hoping that we would touch on. Kelly, is there anything that you want to share kind of with this audience that maybe we haven't gotten to yet?
No, I think, I mean, the symposium stuff aside, it's definitely worth putting on your strategic radar. If you're not able to attend this year, the live content is, really valuable. I will say that from our perspective, so even though our organization grew out of Symposium, we're so much more than Symposium. And while that's, 5 days out of the year, we also do a lot of other content and programming outside of it. So from a resource aspect, Symposium 365, we have a lot of content about thought leadership within space. My department too, Space Commerce Institute, we have a podcast. We put out a lot of discussions around, the investor market within the space ecosystem. So there's lots of other ways to stay plugged in to make sure that you're getting the kind of information that's going to be necessary to your business strategy. And I'm happy to point you in, right directions. Just send me a note on LinkedIn. I'm very active on that too. I'm not in the government, so I will accept people. I'm a little less judicious because I can be, but I'm happy to point you in additional resources where it could be relevant and helpful.
And we'll go ahead and put in the chat your LinkedIn profiles for all three of you for people to connect with. So that's probably the best way to move forward if you have questions for the panelists that come up later. Michelle, same question to you. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think might be helpful or that you'd like to touch on?
No, I think it's been very useful. I myself have taken notes, a couple of things that I didn't think of before, which is fantastic. And I just want to say I look forward to seeing you at Space Symposium. And if you're not there, then hopefully a future Space Symposium.
Damon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I do want to make sure that I didn't kind of leave people with a negative impression of trying to approach the government during symposium. Now, acknowledging the fact that the government it's big, and it, whether it's NASA or the DoD, we're spending the bulk of the U.S. dollars in industry, in the space industry. So even if you don't have like a direct pitch for the government, if you're not going to be a prime, that's okay. There is tons and tons and tons of business to business activity going on inside of Space Symposium. A lot of networking. The space industry is surprisingly small. And if you're in it for any period of time, pretty soon you will know lots of folks all over the country in all kind of little corners of it. So I guess that's kind of part one. Part two is, it's easy in your company to kind of stay heads down in your company, and as rightfully you should. But in the weeks running up to Symposium, make sure that you're checking out publications like Space News, Ars Technica. Michael Sheets on CNBC writes very well on the space economy, things like that, just to kind of get a better perspective of what you're likely to hear, because right now a lot of signals are being sent out in media about announcements and so forth, and it'll just kind of help you contextualize what you hear going on at the Space Symposium. And then maybe the last thing is this thing is a marathon. It is going to take a lot of stamina to get through it. Colorado Springs, most people don't know this, it is higher than Denver is. Downtown Colorado Springs is about 6,200 feet. So about 1,000 feet higher than Denver. So hydrate, especially if you attend the after parties and that kind of thing. Carry some Advil and probably some Band-Aids, because while the campus is tight, you will find yourself walking back and forth a lot across the Broadmoor campus. And really just take it all in, because it is a mesmerizing setting. It is so beautiful. And you will see, if you're like me, I'm a lifelong space nerd. I see all of my space heroes walking around the exhibit hall, and it's hard not to be a fanboy and go, oh my gosh, there's, and just kind of, just have kind of like that Oscar red carpet moment where you're sitting there kind of gushing over who you just ran into. So yeah, enjoy it.
I think if there's anywhere to fanboy, that's a good place. I think they're ready for it there, right? Kelly wrote electrolyte packages for water. This is like real expert advice. I'm not kidding, that having the comfortable shoes, the staying hydrated, getting a good night's sleep, they seem so silly. They seem like silly kind of things, but they are not, because they're like critical infrastructure for like running the ship correctly for those 4 days.
What has saved me, honestly, especially coming from DC, is the electrolyte packets for water. I bring compression socks to sleep in at night. And I also sleep under a humidifier. And there are ones that you can put like in water bottles next to the desk, but it is also so dry that it affects my overall thing. I also get those little oxygen that people use for skiing or hiking, because altitude really affects me. I get altitude sickness, but I now have all these things in my bag. Like it really is helpful.
Like a Space Symposium go bag.
Truly. Yeah, truly. Yeah. And I find myself giving out electrolyte packets to people. I buy them in bulk because I see them run down. I'm like, here.
That's better than a business card.
Yeah.
Put your company name on an electrolyte package.
Actually, yes, that's valuable swag.
Yeah, exactly.
With your email and your phone number.
With your email and your phone number. Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to just take a minute to thank the three of you. This has been a really helpful conversation for people who are Symposium veterans and people who are brand new to Symposium. And, I think that some of the advice on follow-up and kind of where you can go is really relevant, even if you're not able to attend this year. So something to keep in mind for future years as well. If you'd like to get in touch with the panelists, please feel free to through their LinkedIn, although Damon apparently will ignore you. No. And join us for our next webinar. We'll be talking about how to make your experience with SBIRs successful. So that hopefully we're dropping that link in the chat as well. You can register for that and join us in 2 weeks. And again, thank you all so much. And I just hate when you get off of a webinar, you don't get to shake hands and say thank you and do the rah-rahs. So I hope you as panelists will accept the rah-rahs during the live conversation. And to all of our attendees, thank you for making the time to join us for this conversation.
Thanks,
Thank you
Meredith.
for
Thanks,
having me.
everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.